to a new Harry's Garage video, and today's car is the Range Rover Sport SV Edition 1. So this is the car that replaces the infamous Range Rover Sport SVR, and Edition 1 is what they're doing in the first year of production. It's not a regular production car. There aren't going to be many of these. They're all to order, and it's a very special car, and they've done a huge number of changes on it. It's also much more expensive than you might imagine. So yeah, list of this one is 168,800. It's got most extras on it. This one here is 173,000 on the road, and you can option carbon brakes and carbon wheels, which would add another £15,000. So you're right up in the 185,000, £186,000 for the Range Rover Sport. But also on this review, I'm going to include reference to the Aston Martin DBX 707 and the new Cayenne Turbo with GT package, because I had both of those cars in while this one's been around, and it's been very useful to compare all three models. First though, let's have a closer look at this Range Rover Sport SV. Now, from the front, how do you recognise the SV version? Well, obviously it has this much deeper air dam, which I'm surprised at. When I looked at the other cars, they weren't nearly as aggressive at the front end as this, and Range Rover have always prided themselves with their off-road ability. I would have thought that would disappear in an instant if you went near a field, but there you go. It's got a deep air dam, and here I've got Edition 1, very subtly put on the bottom splitter, and it's carbon everywhere. Even the Range Rover is in carbon round here, little bits of trim, and carbon bonnet as well. And I have to say, it is beautifully painted, so you can't tell where the lacquer starts and the paint. Very nicely done. Also, bonnet vents from there, and then, well, 23-inch wheels on this car and enormous brakes hiding behind there. If this car had been fitted with the carbon ceramic brakes, they're 440mm. They are the biggest carbon brakes in production. Mighty 8-pot calipers as well. And also on all-season tyres. There is a summer tyre option, but almost all of them apparently are coming out on this Michelin, very dedicated tyre for this car, Pilot Sport all season. What else can we see? Well, it's big, isn't it? It has volume. This new Range Rover Sport, compared to the previous model, has added much more usability and comfort inside. As you probably know, if you're a regular on the channel, I've been running one of these for about 6 months now. I've done 10,000 miles in it, and it's the big thing I've noticed. I came from Range Rover to Range Rover Sport, and I always thought they were a bit pinched inside. Not so with this model. And if I open up, well, it gets dedicated seats in this car for the SV version. Not much other change recognisable for inside. When we get to drive it, I'll take you through the controls, that SV button on the steering wheel. But I do like the seats in it, very comfortable. And the big change over the other models I mentioned, the Aston DBX and the Cayenne Turbo, was just the comfort and just sort of luxuriousness inside, and the fact that the rear seats, you've got backrest adjust on here. It's a much nicer place to sit than in the back of this than perhaps the Cayenne Turbo. Another thing to note is actually the tyre sizes are different front to rear, which is not what Range Rover normally do, but they're 285 at the front and 305 at the rear, the biggest tyres ever fitted to a Range Rover, 305, 35, 23. Round the back, well, obviously the giveaways are the quad exhausts, unmissable, and the SV badge, this white badge that is, I'm confused by this because it also goes on the most luxurious Range Rover or the most sporting Range Rover Sport. What happened to R? SVR seemed they had all those years, we all knew what a Range Rover Sport SVR was, and now we have to call it SV. Again in the back, loads of space. Again, much bigger, much more upright than with the Cayenne. So this boot, you can hardly see, is much more usable. I don't think you get a spare wheel. No, you don't get a spare wheel, just a bit of goo and things like that. All very practical though. I ought to just mention the suspension on this as well, because it's very trick. Completely different setup to a regular Range Rover Sport. It's got this hydraulically linked suspension on it. The shockers always are linked. it's how McLaren do it on their Super Series, and SVO have adopted it for this car because it gives them much better control of roll and pitch, which we'll see when we get on the road. But generally, like this, it rides 10mm lower than a regular Range Rover Sport, and if you press the SV button, well, you're 25mm lower than a regular Range Rover Sport. You can tell also from the rear, if you look behind a Range Rover, when you're following this car, you think that looks odd. I'm sure I don't normally see that. You can see all the rear suspension because it has a completely different rear subframe on it. Huge amount of engineering to do it, but you just gives it more flexibility, more travel at the rear, and more control. It's just a stiffer setup. There you are, very obviously carbon bonnet, very nicely made. Feels like that it was on my Project 8, was also carbon bonnet. And you get a sort of engine cover SV. Hiding under there is the BMW's 4.4 litre petrol engine from the M5 CS in exactly the same tube. So 635 horsepower, 750 Newton meters of torque. Apparently you get 800 Newton meters of torque if you press launch control. So a pretty trick engine. First time they've been over 600 horsepower in a Range Rover Sport. So let's take it outside, take it for a drive. Well, how do I know I'm in an SV Range Rover Sport? Not massive clues really. Obviously the seats are different in here, and I have an SV button on the steering wheel, which we'll get to in a moment. And then I've got Edition 1, SV Edition 1 on here. Is there any other changes? Yeah, a bit of carbon fibre here as well. I mean, it's all very plush. That's what Range Rover Sport is. Well, it has to be at that sort of price they're now charging for this car. But let's just start it up. And yeah, I can hear there's definitely a V8 rumble. This one has the optional panoramic roof in it. Yeah, in the back. Does it say SV anywhere? Do you know, I don't think it does actually. Wireless charging down there. Big glove box, huge glove box. This one always gets people. There's cup holders there. I mean, if you move that back, there's a huge great bin for sort of valuables or something. I don't know why they do it, but it's a massive great hole. And there's also a little shelf underneath the center console that you forget is even there. Now, obviously being a 24 car, how do I turn all this nannying off that the EU insists on? Well, I press and hold this button on the steering wheel, it comes up there, and I go to low, and that's job done, which is great. It turns off sound for speed limit. What's it do? Speed limit warning is off, forward collision warning goes back to normal, and lane assist is off as well. So I quite like that. It's that easy. Electric controls for the seats, obviously in the door. All very familiar really. Yeah, electric power steering, which you're very noticeable as soon as you get there. And with the latest Land Rover products, they've done away with the heater knobs and things, and they're on here. So if I want to adjust the heat, I have to press that and go up and down. And we grumble about it, but I have to say it's pretty easy to do. It's just the fact that you're actually taking your eyes off. It's with a heater control button, a knob, you can sort of do it like that while you're driving. Here I have to look at it briefly and then do it again. My eyes have gone off the road. I think that's why we don't really like it. So let's get going. I'm just in normal mode at the moment, and we'll go out and go see how it behaves on some better roads. Quite like on here, you've got this dynamic, you've got a shortcut. You don't obviously have any buttons, but I have buttons. I'll put the exhaust on and I'll put the stop start off so it doesn't do that. And you'll just get a sense what this car's like. Here we go. Yeah, hopefully that's coming across. There is a V8 woofer as soon as you move off. It's not quite as pronounced as it was in the supercharged SVR previous generations, but yeah, there's all sorts of noise restrictions these days, so it's harder for engineers to have that sort of sound, that raucous sound of the previous one. But very refined. I do like it. If I do the modes, this is what it starts off at. It's comfort mode. I've got dynamic and I've got SV mode, which we'll try out further down in the review. But comfort really does mean what it says. I've got some terrible roads around us. I can't notice the difference between my regular D300 Range Rover Sport and this. If anything, I think this actually rides better than my regular Range Rover Sport, which is quite something on the aggressive 23-inch wheel and tyre combination, but it's all down to that 6D trick suspension interlinked and the fact it doesn't have anti-roll bars. I also tested it on my noisy bit of road and I think it was around the 67 decibel mark. So really quiet, really hushed. And that is your immediate feeling as soon as you drive off in this car. I think for the squirt up the hill, I think I ought to press the SV button. I mean, it all changes. Car lowers down. I love how the paddles on the steering wheel, they glow red. I've got a different dash layout. It's warning me, I hope I haven't got anything in the boot or anything on the roof. Now I'm in SV mode. So it gets very serious in SV mode, and if I actually went in there, I can actually put it into a different traction control system. So here we are, 30 miles an hour, D-limit sign, here we go. And off it goes to very high speeds very quickly. They quote, I think it's 3.7 seconds to 60, which for a big car like this is mighty impressive. And when we had the 3 cars out, I had a couple of friends with me and we took all 3 cars out. It was remarkable how this, although it has a deficit on the DBX of that 707 horsepower, this is 635, it wasn't as noticeable on road as you would imagine, and they were pretty closely matched, all 3 cars. And that's surprising, especially so when you know the weights of the cars, because I managed to weigh all 3 cars, and you won't be surprised to hear that this Range Rover Sport SV was the heaviest, 2,580 kilos. But then it hasn't got the lightweight options of the carbon wheels and the carbon brakes, and it has a panoramic roof. So this is about as heavy a SV as you could probably get. The Cayenne, even though it's hybrid and it's got a 29 kilowatt hour gross capacity battery, that was actually lighter than this. It went 3,560 kilos, and lightest by far, no surprise there, the Aston DBX 707, which was 260 kilos lighter than this at 2,320 kilos. So not only does the Aston DBX have the most power, it is the lightest by a fair margin. SVO have actually lowered the diff ratio, so in second gear it gets to 52 miles an hour, so it's really quite low geared, and that gives it the punch and the acceleration that defies its weight and why it was keeping up with the DBX. Right, I'm going to go back to SV and I'm going to take it down here, and I'm going to just actually change gear manually. It does those quicker changes. Here we're in second, pop it round there, rolls beautifully controlled. Oh, I love the changer. I just saw it flash yellow then as I changed up. And for such an extreme suspension setting at the moment, I am quite impressed of how it's tackling the bumps. It's a little fidgety. If I go, I'll go dynamic, it calms the ride quality right down. Very different in dynamic. If I go to comfort, then it's plush and it's exceptional. So there are marked differences between the modes to go there, but I think the most impressive thing was when I turned off and shot down here. I was pretty aggressive on turning, didn't roll, squatted, went, and I find it's well worth, if you are in SV mode, just to put it into track. because yeah, it's busy, the dynamic stability controlling this mass, and that just means it doesn't intervene when it shouldn't, has no real need to intervene. But again, yes, I can feel it just fighting the bumps now I'm in SV mode. Right, I've got it in dynamic now. I think that's a very good setting for daily use if you are on a bit of road like this. Here's that bump. Yeah, it did move there. I mean, I suppose it's that mass it's controlling. Again, I'm back in auto mode round here. Very good control of the mass there. Yeah, it's clever, this suspension. It's got a lot of work to do, but there is a reason they've gone for it, and it's how it can control the mass and also how it can absorb bumps when it's in the comfort mode. So it has double advantage to it. Yeah, time for some likes and dislikes then. Well, starting with the dislikes, I've got to mention the name. I don't understand why Land Rover's decided that SV just covers all bases. It's confusing. I liked SVR, Range Rover Sport SVR, had an R on the badge. I'm a simple creature. R means it's quick to me. SV is just odd. And I don't understand why we've got this new trick Defender coming, Octa, and that goes off in a tangent. So when we had SVX, we thought before. So, name. 2, there's no escaping the mass of this car, and you're sort of fighting the mass. Everything they've done with it is to control that mass. The Porsche Cayenne, the mass, because it was battery and they can place it, didn't affect its dynamics nearly as much because it was much lower down, and it gave it a 50-50 weight distribution. With this, it's mass everywhere, it's huge, it's got pano roof, so it's harder for them to do. And then 3, just stepping from car to car, I did notice that this was the steering wrap that felt the most electrically assisted, slightly alien. If you're in isolation, it's really good steering, it turns in, it's a quicker rack they've put on, it's huge hardware changes. It's a quick, I think 13 point something ratio instead of 17 point something normal, but there is a feeling that it's slightly slower, the steering. Right, I am now on a great bit of road and coming into my favourite bend, so I'm going to change down, go to manual, let's chuck it round here, and I'm in SV mode, and this is where it just comes alive, and it does stuff. Wow. That's serious, and the brakes get a special mention. I notice they do need a bit of heat in them, but once they've got some heat in them, yeah, it's good. And there, I was aggressive on the throttle, I felt it squat, and I can feel it charge out. It controls understeer very well indeed. It's not like that if you get in the Aston DBX by comparison, that almost oversteers. It's got more rear bias on how it deploys its power. But with this, there is just a sense that it's driven from the rear, but not as aggressively so as the DBX. Yeah, I've sort of moved on to the lights, haven't I? Not a like with it, just its easygoing nature. Of the 3, it has almost a luxury feel. If I put it back into comfort, it's just a mile muncher. Even though it's got that mad mode, that's a really good quality to have. I also like how adjustable it is, that you can do the modes you want. I think I'm in comfort at the moment, but that's very good. And it's also got, of course, all its off-road ability and wading and all those qualities that we get from Range Rover. So, in conclusion, what do I think towards this car? I think where it stars is its all-round ability, how amazingly comfortable it is and easygoing nature, as well as having the wild side. It feels like it's a SVR version of the full-sized Range Rover. That is the capacity of this car, and that's what I noticed against the two other rivals I had in. The Cayenne was more sports car-like, shrunken. DBX had an even higher quality, a luxurious feel to it, and a more dynamic edge. It had it obviously because it was lighter, but you could tell it didn't have the refinement, the suspension you could hear sort of working, when this doesn't have any of that. Which one would I choose? I think the benchmark still for dynamics out of the three is the DBX. Surprisingly, the Cayenne e-hybrid was better on that front, but it's a smaller car. This does amazing things for what it's trying to control, but it's not as clear through the steering and the feel through a bend that the DBX is. That just is a better starting point, shall we say. But if you've got like one parking space, why do you buy a car like this? And you've got one parking space, you live in London and you want an exciting car that does absolutely everything, then I think this is where this one scores, because it's the only one I would like to ride in the back. It's not actually that bad in the back of a DBX, but it's that practicality and how you use it. It's got a huge boot, it's just easy, there's dealers everywhere, servicing won't be as expensive. So it's all those sort of qualities that I like about this car. And it's also barking mad when it's all lit up, and I've got SV pressed, well, it really does an amazing job. I've seen videos of it on track. It does stuff on track it should not do, and I think it's outstanding that it's got the braking. When you now know the mass and you see how this goes, and that it's as sharp as anything on the brakes. Extraordinary braking power. So there you go. I've enjoyed my time with this car. It's a different sort of experience than I was expecting from it. It's not nearly as crazy on the sounds and that aggressiveness. It's got a laid-back character that's hugely appealing on a day-to-day basis. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, well, keep watching, keep subscribing. More videos coming on very soon.